The scent of roasted turkey always carries the faint metallic tang of betrayal. My name is Maya, and before I tell you how a cold plate of lukewarm stuffing led to me stripping my biological parents of their proudest title, I want to pause for a second. Drop a comment below right now and let me know, where in the world are you watching this from? I read every single comment, and I love seeing how far this story travels. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you never miss another story. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. 5 years ago, Thanksgiving was supposed to be hosted at my parents' house in Oak Ridge. I had spent 3 days preparing. I made the cranberry sauce from scratch, bought the wine they liked, and even stayed up late baking 2 pumpkin pies. But 2 hours before I was supposed to drive over, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mother. "Maya, sweetie, we think it's best if you don't come today. Your sister is bringing her new boyfriend, and we just don't want any of your usual drama ruining the mood. Let's do lunch next week instead." Drama. That was their code word for me speaking up. 6 months prior, my older sister had embezzled nearly $12,000 from the small business account we technically shared. Money I had put in through my own freelance web design work to launch our boutique line. When I confronted her, my parents accused me of dividing the family. When I threatened legal action to recover my life savings, they labeled me unstable and dramatic. The money was gone, washed away under the rug of family loyalty, and I was expected to smile and pass the gravy. Standing in my small kitchen surrounded by fresh pies, the text felt like a physical slap. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just grabbed my heavy winter coat, walked out to my car, and drove aimlessly through the light November snowfall until I found an open diner downtown. It was a cozy, dimly lit place with vinyl booths and the rich aroma of maple syrup and dark roast coffee. I sat in a booth near the back, ordered the holiday dinner special, a sad, solitary slice of turkey with instant mashed potatoes, and stared out the window, quietly wiping away tears. At the booth adjacent to mine sat an older couple and a man in his early 30s. They were laughing loudly over a shared plate of pecan pie, their warmth radiating across the aisle in stark contrast to my icy isolation. The older woman, dressed in a soft emerald sweater with silver hair framed like a halo, noticed me. She didn't offer a pitying look. Instead, she offered a bright, warm smile. "Honey," she called out gently, leaning across the vinyl partition. "No one should eat Thanksgiving dinner alone with tears in their gravy. Come sit with us. We have way too much pie." I hesitated, wiping my cheek. "Oh no, I don't want to intrude on your family. We aren't a traditional family anyway," the older man said with a rich, booming laugh. "I'm Richard, this is my wife Evelyn, and this is our son Julian. And right now, there's an empty seat with your name on it." That single invitation changed the trajectory of my life. I slid into their booth timid at first, but within 20 minutes the ice melted completely. Evelyn asked about my life, not out of nosiness, but with genuine, earnest interest. When I reluctantly admitted why I was eating alone in a diner on Thanksgiving, Julian didn't offer cheap platitudes. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Family isn't built on blood, Maya. It's built on respect. If they trade your dignity for comfort, they don't deserve a seat at your table." That night, Evelyn gave me her phone number and made me promise to call her the following week for dinner. I did. One dinner turned into weekly Sunday roasts. Sunday roasts turned into helping Evelyn in her garden and discussing real estate investments with Richard, who happened to be a retired corporate attorney. Julian, a brilliant software architect, became my closest confidant and, eventually, the man who held my heart. Where my biological parents saw drama, Richard and Evelyn saw resilience. When I told Richard about the stolen money, he didn't brush it off. He spent 3 weekends helping me audit my old business records, building a bulletproof civil claim that forced my sister to sign over her rights to the brand without a lengthy court trial. For the first time in my life, I had people in my corner who fought for me. 3 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, Richard and Evelyn officially made it formal. Having lost my own grandparents years ago and being entirely estranged from my biological family, who hadn't reached out except to demand I drop the legal claim, Richard and Evelyn legally adopted me as an adult. It was a simple legal procedure, but emotionally, it was monumental. I was no longer a discarded daughter. I was a cherished child, an heir to a legacy of real love, and officially Julian's partner in life and business. My biological parents had no idea. They had blocked my number after I reclaimed my stolen funds, convinced I would eventually come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and family unity. They assumed I was sitting in my apartment, miserable and lonely, regretting my drama. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Fast forward to 6 months ago. Julian proposed on a crisp autumn evening in the very same diner booth where we met. When we began planning the wedding, Evelyn looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Maya, you deserve the grandest celebration this city has ever seen." And that's when the plot for the ultimate reckoning began to take shape. My biological parents were about to get the invitation of a lifetime. Not as the honored mother and father of the bride, but as spectator guests at the wedding of the century. We sent the formal invitation in a thick cream-colored envelope lined with gold foil, addressed to my biological parents and sister. I knew exactly how they would react. They were status-obsessed, social-climbing narcissists who checked the local society registries weekly to see who was marrying into money. When they saw the crest of the city's grandest historic estate on the embossed card, a venue reserved only for the ultra-wealthy, they wouldn't be able to resist. To ensure they actually showed up, I didn't attach a personal note. I simply had the wedding planner send an invitation stating that Maya's presence was requested at the union of the Sterling family, complete with an RSVP card for VIP guest seating. Sure enough, 3 days later, the RSVP returned marked with 3 enthusiastic checks. For the next 4 months, while my biological family bragged to their neighbors about how their successful daughter was getting married at a multi-million-dollar estate, Richard, Evelyn, and Julian were quietly orchestrating the details of the event. Richard used his extensive corporate network to ensure that every major business figure, city official, and high society reporter in the region received a seat. He wanted the room packed with people whose opinions my parents valued above all else. On the day of the wedding, the grand ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light across tables adorned with white orchids and towering ice sculptures. My biological parents and sister arrived early, dressed in their finest attire, strutting around the foyer as if they owned the place. They made sure to introduce themselves to several prominent guests as the parents of the bride, soaking in the polite nods and admiring glances from executives they had tried for years to network with. They were seated in the third row on the bride's side, glowing with smug satisfaction. In their minds, I had finally come to my senses. They believed I had invited them as a gesture of submission, an apology for the drama 5 years ago, ready to hand them front-row access to my new lifestyle. When the string quartet began to play the procession, the room fell silent. My sister sat back, smirking, waiting to see me walk down the aisle alone or on the arm of some paid escort. But as the double oak doors at the back of the chapel swung open, the entire room gasped softly. I stood there in a custom silk gown, but I wasn't walking alone. On my left stood Richard, dressed in a tailored charcoal tuxedo, holding my hand with tears in his eyes. On my right stood Evelyn, radiating elegance in a floor-length sapphire dress. They were holding my arms, beaming with unconditional pride, walking me down the aisle together as my mother and father. As we passed the third row, I turned my head slightly and met my biological mother's eyes. The color instantly drained from her face. Her eyes darted rapidly between Richard, Evelyn, and me. Beside her, my biological father's jaw dropped in sheer confusion, while my sister sat frozen, her champagne glass hovering halfway to her mouth. They looked around, realizing that everyone in the room, the city judges, the real estate tycoons, the journalists, was smiling warmly at Richard and Evelyn as the proud parents. We reached the altar where Julian stood waiting, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. The officiant smiled, looked at the crowd, and began the ceremony. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the officiant asked, his voice echoing clearly through the grand hall. Richard stepped forward, took my hand, and placed it into Julian's. He then looked directly at the crowd, and squarely at my biological parents, before speaking into the microphone attached to his lapel. "My wife Evelyn and I give our beloved daughter Maya with all the love and pride in our hearts," Richard said, his voice deep and resolute. 5 years ago, fate brought Maya into our lives when she was left alone on a day meant for family. We chose her, we legally adopted her as our own daughter, and today we give her away to a man who cherishes her just as deeply. A soft collective murmur rippled through the audience. My biological mother gasped loudly enough to be heard over the string quartet. Her face flushed a deep, violent crimson. My biological father half stood from his seat, his eyes wide with utter humiliation as he realized what had just been announced to the most influential people in the city. They weren't the parents of the bride. They were nobody. They were complete strangers sitting in a room full of powerful people who now knew that they had abandoned their own child on Thanksgiving over a petty dispute. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. When Julian and I sealed our vows with a kiss, the room erupted into thunderous applause. As we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, I kept my eyes fixed forward, a serene smile on my face, deliberately stepping past the third row without giving my biological family a single glance. They had spent 5 years calling me dramatic for demanding respect. But as we moved toward the grand reception hall for the final phase of the evening, they were about to learn that the main event hadn't even started yet. The grand reception hall was a vision of gold and white, but for my biological family, it was a waking nightmare. While guests mingled over champagne, my biological father pushed his way through the crowd, his face twisted in rage, flanked by my pale, shaking mother and sister. They cornered me near the grand staircase where Julian, Richard, and Evelyn were talking with a local judge. "What is the meaning of this circus, Maya?" my father hissed, keeping his voice low but dripping with venom. "Adoption? Announcing to these people that we abandoned you? How dare you publicly humiliate us like this?" My mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging through the lace of my sleeve. "You owe us an explanation. We raised you. We gave you everything, and you replace us with strangers and drag our name through the mud in front of the whole city?" Before I could speak, Richard stepped smoothly between my biological parents and me. Standing a full head taller than my father, his calm, authoritative presence instantly checked their aggression. "I suggest you remove your hand from my daughter," Richard said quietly, his voice like velvet over steel. "You are guests in this venue, but your invitation can be revoked in an instant. She is our daughter." My sister snapped, her voice cracking with jealousy as she looked around at the opulence of the room. "You can't just buy a family." "I didn't buy anything," I said, stepping up beside Julian and looking my sister dead in the eyes. "You threw me away 5 years ago over a bowl of cold gravy because I dared to ask for my own stolen money back. You called me drama and locked me out. Evelyn and Richard took me in when I was sobbing in a diner booth. They didn't just give me a home, they gave me dignity." Evelyn stepped forward, her expression cool and untouchable. "Maya is our legal child, our sole female heir, and the co-owner of our family enterprise. You three are simply spectator guests who were given a front row seat to see what you threw away." My mother looked as if she had been struck. She looked at Richard, a man whose wealth and influence dwarfed anything my father had ever dreamed of, and then back at me. The realization hit her all at once. The lifestyle, the elite connections, the unconditional devotion I now possessed were things they could never touch. "Maya, please." My mother stammered, her voice suddenly small and frantic as she realized the social catastrophe unfolding. "We're your blood. We can fix this. Let us sit at the main table. People are watching." "People are watching," I agreed with a tight, serene smile. "And that's the point." I signaled quietly to the estate's security detail, 2 tall men in sleek black suits who had been standing nearby. "Security," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the background piano music. "These guests are causing a disturbance at my private reception. Please escort them off the property immediately." Gasps echoed from nearby tables. Several prominent business associates of my father turned to watch as the security guards stepped up, firmly taking my biological parents and sister by their elbows. "Maya, you can't do this," my father shouted, his face turning purple as he tried to pull away, attracting the attention of every high society guest, journalist, and municipal official in the room. "We are your family." "No," I called out calmly, as they were marched toward the heavy glass doors into the cold rain outside. "You were just a temporary stop on my way to finding my real family." The heavy double doors swung shut behind them, cutting off my father's desperate protests and leaving them standing in the wet parking lot, their high society ambitions crushed and their reputations in tatters. The room went silent for a fraction of a second before Richard raised his champagne glass to the crowd. "To Maya and Julian," he announced warmly. "To love, loyalty, and the family we choose." The entire room erupted into cheers and clinking glasses. Later that night, as Julian and I stood on the balcony looking out over the glowing estate grounds, he wrapped his arms around my waist. The crisp autumn air burned my cheeks, but inside I had never felt warmer. 5 years prior, I thought my life was over because the people who shared my DNA decided I was too inconvenient to love. I thought I was condemned to be the outcast, the dramatic daughter left out in the cold. But standing there, wrapped in the arms of a man who adored me, supported by parents who had legally claimed me as their own, I realized the ultimate truth about vengeance. Revenge isn't about screaming, shouting, or breaking things. True revenge is living exceptionally well, building a life so magnificent that the people who tried to destroy you can only watch your success from outside the gates, begging for a piece of the warmth they voluntarily walked away from. I looked up at the stars, took a deep breath, and smiled. The drama was finally over, and my real life had just begun.